what are the opportunities to have cooperative ownership structures? Because if you think about it, when you bring automation into a cooperative, people are going to be thinking about jobs a lot.
Right, we're hearing lots of layoffs in companies saying they want to do more AI.
I think it's definitely CEO goes off to a conference, hears some great things about AI and comes back and thinks this is what we have to do.
Today, I'm talking to Katrina Ingram, owner of Ethically Aligned AI. We're talking AI in Canada.
Not only is Katrina the founder of Ethically Aligned AI, she's a LinkedIn instructor for building a responsible AI program. She was an AI ethics advisory panel member for the Digital Governance Council of Canada, and she used to be the chief operating officer for CKUA right here in Edmonton. I talked with Katrina 3 years ago, and we're now back together to talk about the future of AI in Canada and what can we expect going forward. All right. Thank you very much. Good afternoon or good morning, I guess.
Yeah,
you made
good morning.
it in okay on the drive.
I did.
It's a little snowy and
It is. Yeah.
and icy out today. There's I don't know if I've ever seen a flash. Did you get the flash freezing warning?
I did not get that warning. No. I just kind of took it slow. Yeah, that's my thing.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, last night on the Weather Network they issued a flash
Oh, they
freezing
did.
alert.
Okay.
So I don't know if I've ever seen a flash freezing alert, but it's because it went from like on my drive home at 6 o'clock, it was about I think it was like 3 degrees. And then 2 hours later, it felt like minus 16, but it was minus 8.
Hey.
So I think with like it being 5 degrees all day, everything melting, and then a little bit of rain, it just froze in like a few hours, and then it snowed. So, I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
It's an interesting alert.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe AI had a role in issuing that somehow through the Weather Network because they use AI.
Possibly. I don't know. It's a good question.
Yeah. So, as was in the introduction, you're the founder of Ethically Aligned AI, which primarily does what in the AI world?
We've done a number of different things. So I started out in this world as a business in 2021, which actually was still very early. It's funny to say that because we're not that far out from 2021. But I did this feasibility study early in the year. And the results were basically that Canadian businesses were mixed on AI. They weren't sure if it was going to be a thing. They weren't sure how much they were going to use it. And then what happened is 2022 changed everything.
Yeah.
And now everybody is talking about AI, wanting to know more about it. So I do a lot of work in the space of AI literacy. So a lot of work just with awareness. What is AI? How is it going to impact you and your business? What are you going to do about that? How are you going to manage risks? So I do a lot of that kind of work. And some of that is advisory. So helping people come up with policies and risk mitigation strategies. And some of it is more educational.
Yeah. And because I like that area of it because people just go right into like the technology piece and what can it do to like make a fancy video and what can it do to like rewrite my summary for my boss or like what kind of research can it do or searches, right? So I like the idea of talking about the area you talk about because there's problems that we're going to face in the future that I think you're able to kind of think about and experiment with now in terms of finding solutions.
Yeah. And when you think about the trajectory of any technology and you look backwards, it's so much easier to see that. So think about the moment we're having with social media right now because we're 10 years out from it. It's easy to point back and go, oh, yeah, I had no idea that this innocuous sounding thing that was going to connect us to our friends was going to cause all of these other challenges in society. So it's easier when you look back and it's harder when you're in the moment. And we're very much in the moment right now.
Yeah, that's for sure. And so I'll show it out later because you did a graphic that I'm gonna put up on the screen to show everyone because I thought it was really cool. But I do have questions for you because I don't want to necessarily just talk about like the AI and disaster risk because that's one aspect and there's lots of people doing that. I kind of sent you some questions around, whether like someone's a young person or they're a mid-career manager or they're retiring end of career, they're hearing a lot of things in the news about like data centers and government investing in it, and use cases for a lot of it. And so I wanted to kind of hang around that like economic development space and try to help people understand where we're at in Canada, because we hear a lot of like the tech bro sides like OpenAI and ChatGPT, but there's a lot more than that, right? Like there's more than just ChatGPT.
Right.
So let's go into that.
Okay.
So yeah, AI investment, like actually I'm going to do the graphic now.
Okay.
Because I think this is going to help set a context. So I'm going to throw this up here. I know you might not be able to read it all, but we'll get it out through like Katrina's website. I don't know if you're going to put this on the website or your social media.
I will probably post about this on LinkedIn, which is where I tend to hang out. So yeah.
Okay. So what it does, if you can't, do you want to kind of explain?
Sure. Why don't I before I explain the graphic, I'm going to just preface this entire conversation with the fact that I am not an economist. So a lot of this is
me neither.
This is informed opinion, but it's very much opinion. And so this graphic was actually inspired, Brad, by the questions that you sent me wanting to talk about the economy. And I thought, okay, how can we frame this? What does this look like? And I think part of it is trying to figure out what does it look like for Canada specifically.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to kind of frame this in the bigger context of what has Canada's role been in this AI value chain?
Yes.
What does it look like?
Yeah.
So basically I start out with this idea that Canada is a heavy hitter when it comes to research.
Okay.
And if you look at the kinds of academic powerhouses that have come out of AI, I'm talking about people like Jeffrey Hinton, Yoshua Bengio, Rich Sutton, who's right here in Edmonton where we are.
Okay.
These are powerhouse academic names. They are the ones who set the agenda. They've come up with a lot of the really interesting pieces of research that have sparked this AI moment that we're having. Okay. So Canada's a heavy hitter, and this goes back historically. It's very interesting. It actually connects to the weather. So Canada, back in the 70s, kept funding AI research, even though it wasn't very popular. And part of that was because of our bilingual country and wanting to make sure we had a weather system that would serve both the French and English populations.
Okay.
So it's kind of interesting when you think about the history of why we did it, why we stayed in the game, but staying in that game kind of gave us this big platform of research. So we've been very good at that. What we haven't been as good at doing is commercializing and turning this into product. And that's really something that our neighbors to the south are very good at.
Yeah.
So if you look at something, one of the big early success stories, I mentioned this in the infographic, in Canada was Element AI. So this is about maybe 5 or 7 years ago. And it was a company that came out of Mila, which is one of the AI institutes in Montreal, Research Institute, and it had lots of AI talent. What happened to it? It got sold to the Americans. It's now part of ServiceNow, which is a big American company. And it kind of got sold for the IP and maybe some of the talent. Probably cheap. And so that's kind of a typical story, right? We build up a business, we have this amazing IP, and it gets sold off and taken to another place.
Well, it's more of that. It's like, it's like information now is a resource.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of it in Canada in this sector, and it's been exported.
Yes.
Cheap. And now it's being processed and commercialized.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's kind of a typical trajectory. So that's kind of the Canada part of the graphic. Then I move on to the USA, commercialization. That's what they do. And if you think about Silicon Valley, you think about all the other things that you need for commercialization. It's not just about the technology. It's about how do you make this into a product. It's about marketing. It's about money. It's about all of those kinds of things. It's about consumers. Like, do you have a market for this product? And the US has been very good at that, not just for AI products or even software, but for a whole lot of things.
Yeah.
And so they've really kind of taken that to the next level, I think. They're the leaders in AI because of that. When you name, and it is not just about ChatGPT, but think about the other companies that are involved. We have Google with Gemini. We have Anthropic. These are all still U.S. companies. So they're kind of leading the game right now when it comes to artificial intelligence and the product side of things. Okay. But interestingly, and I put this in the graphic as well, there was a story recently about iRobot. So iRobot is a company that makes Roomba.
Oh, those vacuums.
Yeah,
the vacuums,
really popular, been around for about 20 years now. And what caught my eye is they went bankrupt. I'm like, what? How is this possible? It's the super popular product. Turns out they took on quite a bit of debt a couple of years ago to expand their markets, and they weren't able to pay it off. So they've actually been acquired by a Chinese company. That's kind of the third part of my graphic is this idea of commoditization. So once you kind of get really popular and you need to get the price down, who's really good at doing that?
Oh, sure. China. Yeah.
And so if we start thinking about where is this AI train going, I think we're moving into the world of embodied AI, robots. At some point, we're already hearing inklings of that. And who's really good at doing that? Who's making that hardware?
Japan, China.
This is Asia,
Asia,
right?
yeah.
Exactly. So that's kind of the third part of the graphic is this idea of commoditization, making things widespread, and what does that mean? And then the last set of the graphic is these questions. Okay, so what would need to be different for this to be different? Because we're having this moment where we're talking about digital sovereignty. And I think that doesn't just look like having data stay on Canadian soil. I think that's one part of it. But what's the bigger part? Are we really digitally sovereign when Microsoft comes in and makes a big investment here? Is that really what's going on? Or is it just more of that same transfer of...
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah.
So, okay. So to go back to the people you mentioned, like Richard Sutton, is he well known in Canada, or like if you went into OpenAI, would a bunch of people there know him and know his work, or is he kind of centralized? Do you think he's just localized to Canada?
He wrote the textbook on reinforcement learning. He and a guy named Andrew Bartow. And he won the Turing Prize recently. I would say he's had a quieter profile than, say, somebody like Geoffrey Hinton, but I don't think he should be underrated. I think within AI circles, he's very well known, and I think starting to become more known in other circles that are kind of investing in AI and that sort of thing.
So how come, that's interesting because, you know, it's that culture we have in Canada, right? Like we know everyone involved in AI in the States, but we don't know. It's like the Tragically Hip, right? Like they tried to get into the States and they didn't do so good. So they went to Europe, but they were always big in Canada and they were never big in the US, but they're a great band. And it's kind of like same thing, like these AI researchers and leaders, they're not even well known in Canada, but they're well known in the US, maybe in some circles. Are they kind of like do they need to pull like a Chris Hadfield like kind of thing for themselves and like figure out how to come out into the public and communicate some of this stuff?
Well, I think Geoffrey Hinton is sort of doing that.
Is he? Okay.
The other thing that's interesting, so Geoffrey Hinton is actually a Brit who came to Canada through America, I believe. And so there's an interesting story about politics and the role that politics plays in pushing academic talent around. And we're seeing that right now, not just with AI, but with other academics who are leaving the U.S. to come to Canada because of the political situation. So that's another part of the story. And when I've talked to certain people, like Rich Sutton, for example, he's talked about this, the idea that he wasn't happy with what was going on. So a while ago, he came to Canada. I'm not talking about what's going on recently. I'm talking about what's going on like a while ago, a number of people ago.
Yeah, fair enough.
So anyways, I think that's part of the story too, is that we get this, we acquire this talent. In terms of like the profile thing, I think that's really interesting. Part of it might just be these are academics at the end of the day. And they're not the business leaders who tend to get a lot of that attention. And so that might be part of the story as well.
Yeah, I find like academics, artists, like they're really good at what they do, but they can't commercialize well unless they get lucky or kind of go down that road of investing a whole ton of money or finding the right team that will sincerely work with them as opposed to like wanting to take advantage of them. Right. Like I could see that happening. Especially if you go into the States. Like if somebody like Richard Sutton went to the States, they would probably, I don't know if he would do well down there in the case of getting compensated and being legally protected for all of his research and his knowledge.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, because of the powerhouse talent that we have here, we were able to attract DeepMind for a little while before they got acquired by Google and became part of that. But we actually had an office in downtown Edmonton for a number of years. It was I think it might have been the first DeepMind office outside of London. And DeepMind, of course, has now become Google Brain. So it's part of that, the Googleplex.
That's swallowing up everyone.
And it was because of that talent. It was such... Rich Sutton in particular, but other people that were around him, because of the work they were doing, they were able to attract that kind of investment. So I find that kind of an interesting angle as well.
Yeah. Do you know the government of Canada recently gave a massive grant to a Canadian AI company?
Oh, Cohere, is that?
Cohere, yeah. Cohere.
Yeah.
Do you know what exactly they do?
Yeah, so they are also a company focused on large language models, the ChatGPT type thing.
Yeah.
But the difference with Cohere, from what I understand, is they're focused on the enterprise. That's one piece of it. So not a consumer-facing type thing. And they're focused on more specific models that would be safer for enterprise use. So generally speaking, I think they're trying to be a better version of large language models in an enterprise context.
Yeah, because I contacted them
Okay.
to see, like I was super excited to hear that Canada invested in a Canadian company in this space. And so I was like, well, they've got to, with their investment, they've got to have some sort of mandate, I would think. So yeah, I contacted them to inquire about like development of some sort of, risk monitoring, hazard monitoring system. But I think obviously I don't have millions of dollars to invest. And I think that's what they're looking for. But their platform, their back end is pretty interesting. Like it's very sort of not user friendly, but it's, I think, meant for enterprises to be able to build their own applications.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't really looked into it, but that sounds about right in terms of what I understand they're trying to do.
I signed up for an account. I tried to use the back end because I wasn't quite sure what they did. But I'm super excited to kind of see how a company like that does in Canada and where it leads to, and how is the federal government going to kind of, seed them and nurse them and protect them from being swallowed up by, another foreign entity.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And I think giving them access to the Canadian federal government as a market is a huge part of that. Yeah. However, it's not the right solution for every project. So I was looking recently, I saw something posted about a different project that the federal government was doing. And basically they said, we looked at Cohere. It wasn't quite right for what we wanted to do. And so we're going with the GPT model as a result of that. And I was thinking, oh, okay, well, that's too bad. That's too bad. But I think there was some technical reason why they chose to do that. And so I think that's the nuance story, right? So it's sort of like, yeah, we have this thing and it's Canadian and let's support it and that's fantastic. But maybe it's not good for every single use case. And then when you get into the technical weeds, you find out, well, we have to go with that other thing that, is there.
Yeah, and it's too bad like Canadian companies aren't able to pivot, or, I don't know the technology, but obviously maybe they weren't able to pivot or it cost too much or whatever. So yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so Canada's into the research, US is into commercialization, China's looks to be headed into commoditization. So there's obviously going to be kind of like that, like you said, that value chain. So what are you following or tracking as like in terms of like the latest research coming out of Canada?
Wow, the latest research. I don't know that I would say,
or something that like is really kind of not out there, is if anything comes to mind. Is there, like, I try to look for like what's being worked on but not in publicly well known.
So there is a company out of Vancouver called Versus, and they have taken something called the free energy principle, which don't ask me to explain that, but it's attached to this guy named Carl Friston, if your listeners want to look that up. He came up with this, he's a physicist, he came up with this principle. And they are trying to build a different kind of artificial intelligence, which leverages this notion of continual learning. So if we think about the bots that we have today, we train a model. The P in GPT means pre-trained. Right. So it's trained and it knows some things. And now it's fixed essentially until you get to the next version of it. Right. What they're trying to do is this notion of continual learning, which is something happens and the model updates and learns, and then something new happens and the model updates and learns. Don't ask me the details of how they're doing it, but they have some research papers out, and they're a Vancouver-based company. So that is one that comes to mind. Here in Alberta, I think we're also, Rich Sutton, who we've already talked about, also has a very different take on where we should be going, and wrote a plan a couple of years ago now called the Alberta Plan, which is another research agenda. And it's a bit different than what the traditional trajectory is. And so that's another one that I think is interesting. And so there's a lot of interest in how we can get to artificial general intelligence or super intelligence. And some of that is basically saying we're not going to get there through this traditional large language model, add more data, add more compute thing.
Is where Richard Sutton, like, is he out of an organization or university?
Yeah, he's with Amy. Yeah.
Oh, he's okay. So Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute.
Yeah.
So I know, and I know, like, I try to keep this podcast like national, but Alberta, like, Amy is a leading institute in the country.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah, we have 3. So we mentioned Mila already, and Joshua Bengio, I'd say, is the academic that's really
what is Mila?
Well known.
Is it MILA?
So Mila, MILA. It's basically the Montreal Institute.
Oh, okay.
So it's one of the 3. The other one is Vector. So that's out of Toronto, kind of attached to the University of Toronto, Jeffrey Hinton being the notable academic there. Yeah. And then we have one here in Edmonton, which is Amy.
And they're all separate, 3.
They're all separate, but they all kind of
they all feed into each other.
They feed up to this thing called CFAR, which is basically the pan-Canadian organization that they do a lot of things, but AI is one of the big things that they do. So
CFAR.
It's a Canadian Research Institute.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the acronym CFAR.
CFAR, CIFAR. I'm not sure exactly. Again, C for Canada, the rest of it,
something. Okay, so we've got these 3 organizations across the country. They all feed up into this one organization. And we're leading in research. Okay, so that's where we are today. What other questions I want to make sure I asked this one question about what kind of economic structures might emerge. I put emergency, but emerge when AI is indistinguishable from human produced work. And where I got that idea was from just like all of it's more probably artistic content, but there's going to be a whole lot more. Like you say, if, maybe AI robots will be able to vacuum an entire hotel. Like, and that's obviously going to reduce maybe costs on the hotel side, maybe not. Labor, is AI going to be cheaper than labor? I don't know. Like, I actually don't think it will be.
Okay, I'm going to pause for 1 second. I'm just going to grab a tissue.
Okay, let me do that. I can pause it. Yeah, so that's kind of a big subject, but I kind of think like, okay, if it costs, say I pay someone $20 an hour to clean a hotel, like, or minimum wage, but they want to, have them start working part-time and do the things a robot couldn't, but they want to vacuum the entire hotel with an AI robot out of China. Is that the maintenance of the robot, the software updates, the cleaning, who's going to clean out the robot, like who's going to maintain it? Like, I'm just really curious. I don't expect you to have the answer, but I'm just really curious if that's going to be less or more productive, more efficient, less costly than having a human.
Yeah, so I'm going to take that in a couple of different directions. One is a very Alberta story. So a couple of years ago when I was working on my course RoboEthics, specifically looking at robots, I came across the story of Shell and one of their industrial sites in northern Alberta. And they had recently purchased 2 of the Boston Dynamics dogs. We've probably all seen them dancing and doing those kinds of things. That's not why they bought them. Okay. They bought them for this industrial site to do the dirty, dull, and dangerous work that they didn't want humans to have to do. And so it wasn't necessarily a cost savings kind of a thing specifically, but it was more like if I need someone to go, crawl into that space and clean out that really awful pipe or whatever. I don't know what goes on in these industrial sites, but
it's a safety
something
thing.
like that. Yeah.
Something like
so
that.
It was a safety thing. And so that was kind of their driver. And so
Okay.
I haven't followed up with them to see how that's going, but that might be another reason why a robot might be engaged. So that's one idea. The other idea, kind of going back to the cost thing. So there's a book that I read recently by an economist named Daniel Susskind. Okay. And he basically talks about this idea that eventually all of these different kinds of work will become really cheap to do with AI and robotics and so forth. And so his argument kind of goes back to, yeah, it might start out expensive, but it eventually gets cheap. It's a commoditization argument.
Right. Yeah.
Now, whether he's right or not is totally up for grabs because we don't really know. But I think that is sort of the idea, is that at some point it'll become so efficient that we don't need the human in the loop. Dark factories might be an example of that right now. So these are the factories mostly in China. They don't have any humans. The lights are off. That's why they're called dark factories, because the robots just keep going. And maybe once a week someone comes in and, checks things out or oversees them. But it's this notion that the human in the loop might go away.
What do they make there? Like computer parts?
Yeah, they make all kinds of, I don't know.
That's crazy.
Yeah, just stuff. But it's really interesting to think that, okay, we actually don't, it's not the same as auto manufacturing, let's say. We have a human there.
So I think that's a very interesting observation about AI, because we only hear about the US commercialization of it. We don't, we all know that China can make a t-shirt way cheaper than the US or Canada or whoever. We know that they can manufacture, like my cousin is, I think he's a VP or something for a company out of Alberta that they sell like bucket teeth for graders and trucks. Like they have all their bucket teeth manufactured in China. They obviously can manufacture these bucket teeth cheaper in China and bring them here. And, so we're used to that with those kind of products. But on the technology side, I don't know if we're so used to it in the sense that China's working to really bring down the pricing so they can become the efficient, productive global manufacturer, right?
Yeah.
So there is, even though it's China, there is someone out there working to say, we're going to do this better, faster, cheaper, less expensive, make it easier for everybody to get. So are we going to have like the Temu of AI one day? I guess that's my thought process.
Yeah. Well, and before we get into AI, let's just think about regular manufactured goods. Part of how this happens is cheaper labor costs.
Right.
And there's a lot of ethical questions tied up in all of that.
Sure.
And so I'm not advocating to say this is a good thing I'm saying that this is the trajectory of how things have been and what would need to be different if we wanted to change it. When it comes to software, let's start with that. I think there's been, because there's nothing necessarily physically manufactured, it's been a bit of a different game. So if you think of software as a service and also the language barrier thing, let's say, I think that has been more, we've been more entwined with the United States on that one.
Absolutely.
So they've been kind of leading the charge. But I do think it's interesting when we start thinking about AI, and in particular, when we start thinking about embodied AI, which starts to get into the manufacturing component thing, or smart anything, smart appliances, all of that stuff. Now we have a manufacturing component, and China and Asia have traditionally led on that. Autonomous vehicles, all of this stuff. It's interesting. The story of autonomous vehicles, we could track that whole, maybe not the Canadian research part, but we could track the whole commercialization versus what happens when you get a company like BYD involved and they drive the cost down. Now we have to do protective barriers, i.e. tariffs, to kind of keep that out of the market and make the level playing field happen.
So I wonder, I wonder what kind of appetite there is in Canada to either go down a commercialization route or a commoditization route, and if we're even capable of that.
I think there's a psychology that needs to change, because if you think about Canada, we are such a resource-based place. You could go across every province, starting with BC and forestry, and work your way all the way across. And it's all about some kind of a resource that we extract and sell to someone. And we don't even necessarily do the next level of value add to any of that resource. Like we don't refine the oil, for example.
Exactly.
So that is our history. And so psychologically, can we move past that to get to the next place? And how far are we away from being the tech powerhouse that we say we want to be? I think it's pretty far.
It's hard. Well, we're still a colonization. Like, we're still a colony that is trying to discover what's here and figure out how to work as a society and a culture. Like, we're still just a bunch of miners in a mine cave shifting coal out onto the little bucket trains to go down to the US. So I think it's going to be really hard too. Just because, again, I got lucky and was able to go to Norway and Sweden in March for the Arctic Emergency Management Conference. And going through Norway and then through Sweden, like through all their museums and all their history, like they have a culture they can measure back thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Canada, the culture that was on this land kind of for us started in like 1492. Like, we don't know a whole lot, as much as we should know about pre-colonization. So we're just a country that is kind of like still trying to develop. And I think for me, I kind of see that is what leads to us being in that resource extraction, information extraction, and shipping it out phase. Because we go to Sweden, everything is made in Sweden there. Like watches, furniture, carpet, tile, instruments, vehicles, trucks. They're all Scandinavia, Norway. Like, going through Sweden, my wife and I we bumped into so many creators that are business owners. I was just floored.
Really?
Yeah, it was like, well, Absolute Vodka's from there. Yeah. There's so many, like Mora knives, like all these really popular things. And I was just like, they are so sustainable here. And that's from having I think a culture that's been grown for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, where we're only like 157 years old or something.
Yeah.
And then China, same, right? Like, they've got a very rich history and culture. Their continuity of culture has gotten them to where they are today. And I think we're still struggling to figure out.
I think that is definitely part of it. And I think that the psychology around that, even here in Alberta, when we think about who are we as Alberta, it's very much tied to one industry. Yeah. And we talk about the need to diversify, the desire perhaps, but we haven't really figured out how to do that well yet.
We can't. Yeah. It's, it was, I don't know if have you been to Europe or anywhere? Like, where have you traveled?
Yeah. I was in Europe a couple of years ago. Yeah. And when you go there, you very much have that sense of history.
Where did you fly into?
So we went into Amsterdam. Okay. And kind of started there and then went down towards France and Paris and then over to London for a bit. So
did you fly to Heathrow? Or where did you fly?
Not that time. Yeah. I flew in and out of Amsterdam because it had a direct flight from Edmonton. So that was nice.
So, like, the way I look at it is kind of, this was my observation, because I've been up to the Arctic in Canada. And like, you go into the Arctic and you land at an airport, they call it. It's an airstrip with a little building. Like, on the outside, you think it was almost a house, but they got their ticket sales in there. Their baggage comes in there. It's a little airport. And I'm like, okay, this is a northern airport. It's small, it's makeshift, it's tiny. Then, coming back to Edmonton and looking at the Edmonton International Airport, or even the Calgary, and then me flying over to, like, I think we landed in Paris and then we flew to Heathrow. Like, those airports are massive. I always thought Edmonton was a decent size airport. But when you compare it over there, it's a little shack. The Edmonton International Airport, compared to European, American big centers, is a little shack up in the north. And I think that's going to be really hard to get past.
Yeah, I think part of it might be like, what would what are the benefits of being a little shack,
Right.
let's say?
Yeah.
One of the benefits that I like about Edmonton is, and I've, compared this to the bigger shack of Toronto, Pearson,
Yeah.
is the lineups, right?
Yes.
Like, so I guess part of it might be like framing what are the things that could actually really be going in our favor?
Yep.
And what would that look like if we're going to, because I think if we're just going to compete on how big we are population wise, well, that could take a little while, especially
Absolutely.
with, what's going on with the lack of immigration, let's say,
Yeah.
or the barriers. So what are the things that we could really kind of leverage, and what does that look like for us?
I think it's the long term. Like, I'd really like to see Canada and all the other provinces and territories focus more on like long term, and not kind of like all of this, like let's build, let's tear down this old building. Like when the big debate in Edmonton was around the Royal Alberta Museum, the old RAM building. Like let's demolish that piece of history and build up another building that's going to look brand new, but guaranteed that brand new building would not be designed. I don't think it would have been designed in a way that would have been meant to look nice for 300 years, right? I think the idea is, well, we're going to build up all this new infrastructure, but what's it going to look like when we take it down to rebuild instead of repurpose or rekeep it? Like, that's one thing kind of goes through my mind as a culture too, is that long-term thinking.
Yeah.
Like the Japanese, was it Japan, that built those houses where they would cut down like a giant tree for like the cross beam, and then the architect would make sure to plant that same tree beside it. So when that cross beam has to be replaced, there's a new one right there.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, I'm going way off in that jet. So yeah, like these new emerging economic structures around AI. And when we met for coffee a couple weeks ago, like I brought up the conversation that Douglas Rushkoff had about, companies like OpenAI or Google or whoever creating their own economy. So all their labor becomes AI bots, and all their customers are AI bots, and they're just there to serve AI bots and AI work, while we as humans are kind of still on the outside looking to like grow food, grow materials, things like that. But they become these things that have a purpose for the world, but they've got their own economy. Like, I don't know how that's going to work, if it's even a real thing. I think they're trying to hope to get there, but
yeah, the part I didn't really, and I confess I didn't have a chance to go and look up Rushkoff's interview or whatever you watched, is the consumer part. So I totally, the production part, that part gets talked about all the time. We're not going to have jobs. It'll be automated. We've talked about it here. But what I've always seen is the human is always there as a consumer of some sort. It's just that everything's going to be cheaper. The utopia version of that, we'll all just have abundant stuff. And so the part where we're not consuming it either, that was the part that confused me a bit. I wasn't sure how that played out.
yeah, I think their idea was just around consuming energy, consuming, what is it that AI needs? But I don't want to go too far down that. But it's an interesting thought experiment to wonder if you could have a civilization of AI bots that are sustainable on their own. But here's the thing that I just thought of too. Sorry. Given that Canada's in that research sector, and this is really off topic, but it makes me wonder, like, then why do we make it so difficult for young people to get a university education to continue that research? Like, the cost now to get like a PhD and the time, like just the cost is crazy. And so if I'm looking at it from this model of like research, commercialization, commoditization, is it really a great investment to spend, I don't know what a PhD costs these days, like $100,000?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but let's go with that.
It could be very close to that. Like when you factor in time and the money you're not making being out in the workforce.
Yeah.
So let's say it costs $100,000 to get a PhD, and so you're going to probably be 30 years old, give or take.
Yep.
And that if you want to stay at home in Canada, your best bet is to continue in research, where I don't think the money's that great in research jobs unless big corporations bring in researchers. But then, it kind of just seems like if we're going to be kind of this information resource powerhouse, then let's bring down the cost of turning out good people that can do that and really focus on it.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you talk about Nordic countries, because a lot of those countries' education is free.
It's free.
You just, you put your time in, but you don't actually have to put in money or come out with a debt. So that's part of it. But I think the other piece is, and kind of going back to this notion of, I don't think we want to stay just as the research
for sure.
piece. And so the government has been trying to incentivize people to start companies, and the whole tech, VC and funding sort of grant making sector.
They're horrible though. Like I know that, like I've looked at them a lot, but yeah, if I was a young person coming to university with the capability of developing a product and trying to navigate all of the grants and VC and resources out there, it's a mess. I don't know if you've ever gone through some of those processes, but
not a lot of them, but I agree with you. It's horrible.
Like it's like trying to access capital in Canada is horrible. Like, yeah. And I mean, and I've got experience from like organizations in Alberta and the federal government, because I was part of the one of those super clusters. And I went to these mixers and all these things, and it was always the first question was, oh, how many employees do you have? Like that was the first question so many people would ask me. Like me having employees was the first indicator that I could like come in and be recognized and have a chance. And I'm like, well, I don't have any. Oh, well, that must mean you're not doing so well. Yeah, because I'm by myself. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's something we have to kind of get past. Even that definition of employee. Because if I went out and got like 10 friends and we were all working together, they're not employees.
Yeah.
But the government's going to ask me, how many are on your payroll? Well, none. But there's a team of 10 of us building this.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to have to employ them all, and it's just terrible.
Yeah. Kind of just on that, when we look at where the money goes for AI in Canada, most of it still goes to research, because it's that CFAR down to those research institutes that we talked about earlier. That's a pathway for a good chunk of the investment. And so if we want to do something different, I think that's one thing the government really needs to think about. How are we getting that money out in different channels? Because right now the bulk of it is going through that funnel.
Yeah, exactly. And there are gatekeepers. My experience was a lot of like business development organizations that are there to help guide you through this. I encountered a lot of kind of like baby boomer age people, and I never really got the sense that they were super keen to want to like go above and beyond for support, or they were too overworked, right? Or they weren't comfortable with the online portion of email and Zoom and stuff. And I found it really difficult when I would talk to some of these people. It was kind of like they were looking at my ideas and my product and prejudging it based on their work experience or whatever. And I was kind of like I didn't think that would be part of the process. But yeah, I got a lot of like, well, you're probably going to want to go this way, and that's going to be really hard, and that's going to really take a lot of time to develop with a lot of money. I'm like, yeah, okay. So what's the pathway?
Yeah.
Well, in my experience, software development's a lot more a lot better route to go than hardware. It's like, what? Okay. So I don't know. That was just my experience.
And that's really different. I mean, and I'm not a fan of Silicon Valley in every sense.
Yeah.
But imagine if you were the person pitching, imagine you had Airbnb as your idea, Brad, and you went and pitched that and said, hey, I have this idea for an app and it's all about strangers staying in other people's homes. So they would have been like, what? Like, no way. Or strangers getting in other people's cars, Uber. So the really big like ideas that take that sort of out of the box sort of moment, maybe they get shut down in these conversations.
Absolutely
that
do.
You're,
because the person couldn't communicate it in a way that the market was going to accept it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's some of the help that they needed, but they aren't able to get the grant funding for the ad copy and the marketing help. And it's kind of like, I know Edmonton and Vancouver and other, like I think Toronto has them. They have like those regional innovation networks.
Mm-hmm.
Were they, and I went through the Edmonton one. It was kind of like this, I forget what it was called, but it was meant to help you take your idea, figure out your market and your audience and your ad copy and your spin and communicate it out, which was very, very helpful. However, I found it difficult because it was like a 6-week process. And I couldn't really develop my idea further because you needed to take your idea, go through this, see what comes out the other end, and then test it in the market. Whereas I was kind of like, I'm not getting feedback fast enough. Mm-hmm. Like I want to iterate, get it out to the market and test it that way. But so I have a lot of empathy for founders that are in Canada trying to like innovate and they're worried about money. Because it is really, really difficult to get to.
Yeah.
Sorry, I know I'm going way off our questions here. AI indistinguishable from human produced work. I think that's happening a lot in creative areas and stuff like that. But I guess we'll see. Maybe farming. Ethical thinking. How will ethical thinking evolve in terms of these new potential economic structures? So that's an interesting one, right? Like you say, those dark factories.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you asked me this question, it brought to mind this quote from Upton Sinclair. So he talks about it's difficult for a person to understand something when their paycheck depends on not understanding it. And I think that's part of
that again.
Yeah. So it's difficult for a person to understand something when their paycheck depends on not understanding it.
Okay.
And so when I think about, economic structures, I think that, again, going back to the psychology of what we want to know or what we don't want to know. And I think about this a lot when it comes to the ethics, even of how we're making current day AI. Well, we don't want to talk about the fact that the copyrighted data was taken from creative people. And what are we going to do about that?
Yeah.
We're just sort of like washing that away because we don't look too closely at it. We're not talking enough, I think, about the environment. We have this data center. We want to become data center central here in Alberta. But there's an environmental cost to doing that we're not perhaps having the conversation about because maybe we don't want to understand that as we chase the economic opportunity.
Yep.
So I think that's what Sinclair was getting at. I think he was writing this about the food industry or meat packing back in the day where people were putting a lot of bad things in food like sawdust and stuff that shouldn't be there. So I think that this kind of notion comes up again and again. And so when we think about like how AI is made today and what's the opportunity, for me, the opportunity is how could we do it differently and better? And maybe that is our moment where we can have some of our Canadian values kind of baked into how we're actually doing things.
Yeah, I wonder, that's a hard thing to do. Like trying to convince the market that doing it a different way because of better or different values is the right way. Like it's like for me in emergency management, right? It's like emergency preparedness is the right thing to do. There is a better way to do it. Most municipalities and governments are doing it not that way. But it's like kind of you go back into exactly what you said in your quote. Because I think that happens to a lot of people in terms of you don't need to know how the organization operates, just do your job, right? But for people to really feel valued and want to contribute, they need to know all of the inner workings. And if you're not getting that, then you're just, again, a coal miner stuck in a cave all day, spitting coal out and never getting to see how it's processed, where it goes, what is it being used for. I mean, for all you know, it could be it's being used to like launch satellites into space and rocket ships that land, right? We may never know that. So, yeah, I don't know where that all fits because I got like lots of things going around in my head about that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be like a lot of times the innovation comes from that frontline person, right? It comes from that coal miner who goes, yeah, you know, we could do this better. Or if we only had X, it could be so much better. It's not necessarily from the people who are completely divorced from whatever that business is.
Right.
And I think that's part of the challenge for businesses today, especially when they get really big, is that you get quite divorced from what exactly you're doing. And so maybe as a company or as a country that has a lot of mid-sized businesses where we're a little bit closer, maybe that's an opportunity. Maybe that's something hopeful to think about.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does require kind of getting past the psychology piece of it to kind of say we can all, like, let's all think about this in terms of how do we want to do things differently, i.e. innovation, and what could that look like? And it doesn't always have to be AI or the latest thing. It could just be more basic automation perhaps, or maybe not even automation, something else.
Yeah, because you've got like the commercialization people that are like, we don't care about the values and the ethics. We just care about the numbers. How much have we sold? What's it producing? Are we making money? Are our shareholders happy? And yeah, unless that better way can increase their stock price, like that's where you've got to kind of figure out, right, how to sell it.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
Yeah. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about is what are the business models? I'm a big fan of co-ops.
Oh, yeah.
And we actually do have co-ops here.
Yeah.
We actually have a really interesting story in Alberta. So many years ago, the farmers weren't getting the natural gas that they needed to get out to their organizations, their fields, because it was very focused on the city. So they formed this sort of federation of cooperatives to bring gas to the farms. And it still exists today. Yeah. And it's a really interesting story because it was about, we have a need, we're going to figure out a way to fill it. Yeah. And that's one thing I actually love about Albertans. We kind of have that bit of that spirit, right? Sure. And so I think about that, and I think about driving up the stock price for a small group of people. Yeah. And that's a different, you do a different calculus when you do that. So I think that's one thing. And then the other thing is, gosh, this is escaping me now. I'm going to leave it at that. But I think this ownership structure thing is really interesting.
Yeah, I look a lot into that too for like HazardScape, because either like a co-op or a sociocracy kind of idea where you've got, just that idea that there's groups out there working on their own, all under the same type of mission, but it's very decentralized. It's a very decentralized organization.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. I remember the other thing now. Okay. I'll mention it quickly. In Germany, they have this thing called co-management. And what it means is that a certain amount of the seats on the board have to go to worker representatives. Sure.
Okay.
And so, again, you make different decisions at the leadership level of a company when you have the workers in the room than you would when we've never met one of the workers.
Totally.
And it's a different relationship. And again, that came out of a particular culture. But I think we can look at these examples and go, yeah, that sounds like something maybe that could work in our industry, in our business here in Canada.
Totally could.
Yeah.
And I do agree it should work that way, because you can't, like, you've got to bring those different levels of knowledge together, or decision making is going to be so fractured because, the higher ups are focused on revenue growth, share price, business development. The people down at the bottom are focused on, earning money, but also making their jobs easier. And they can trickle that up if they were to have a trustful, connected. That's why, like in sociocracy, they use consent rather than agreement. So if you're sitting around a table, if you want to move ahead with a project, it's not like a democracy where if 8 out of 10 vote for it, it goes ahead, because there's always going to be 2 people that probably are not happy that they didn't have a voice or didn't get to say. So in a sociocracy, you have to give your consent for the project to head off, and everyone has to give their consent. And if they can't give their consent, then they get an opportunity to pitch to the group why they think the project won't be successful. And I think potentially as they go through that process of the pitch and then make it, the idea is that they either kind of say, oh, well, I thought about this incorrectly. I didn't see it from the rest of their view, or the group will have an opportunity to correct some of their assumptions. And no process goes forward until everybody gives consent. And I kind of like that idea, because I think when you're giving your consent to something, I think internally that's a little bit more of a intimate type of decision rather than just saying to a group, I agree, let's just move on.
Yeah, very
Right?
interesting.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. Okay, I want to make sure. What else did I ask you about that you prepared and did all that work for? What are you thinking about today as a way to develop solutions for problems that will exist in 5 years?
Yeah, so I am thinking about this idea of pro-worker AI. So this comes from the work of a Nobel Prize winning economist, Darren Acemoglu. I may be getting his name wrong, but he has proposed this idea that we need to do things quite differently if we're really going to support workers with artificial intelligence in a way that honors the work that they do and honors human values, agency, this kind of thing. And part of it looks like policy incentives. So one thing he talks about is taxation. So for example, think about all the taxes we pay from a labor standpoint versus a capital standpoint.
Yeah.
How could we level the playing field? So that's kind of a big policy thing. But he also talks about different ways and perhaps which we could construct AI, use it in ways that help people to do their job better. And so I'm sitting with that idea. I'm actually preparing for a talk that I'm going to be giving next year on this topic. And I'm kind of sitting with this idea, doing a little bit of work, trying to think about what does that look like. I think it looks quite different than some of the things that we have right now.
So in that kind of thinking, how, can you give us a sneak peek into what that might look like?
Yeah. So one of the examples he gives is, imagine you're a plumber or an electrician. You're on the job site.
Right.
And you remember that you look at the situation, but there's some other information that you need. What could we give you in that moment that would help augment you?
Okay.
And so it's something like that. Now, how that gets delivered or what does that look like? And all of those kinds of details are the things that I'm going to be thinking about more deeply as I prepare for this talk. But I think it's that kind of notion. It's not like we're going to get the AI robot to be the electrician.
Right.
It's more like, okay, how could an electrician tap into the collective knowledge about that particular field to deal with the particular problem that they're trying to solve in that moment?
Right. So they could end up, it's kind of almost like using augmented reality, right? There are some manufacturing groups or trades that apparently do it where, you've got the layout of the plant and you walk around your glasses and it identifies where you are and it shows on the display where everything is and it can give you little tips. But I think, are you kind of, if I understand you right, it's like a problem solving support where they could maybe describe what's going on and where they are, and all these AIs will kind of get together through trained history or whatever and say, you know what, here's 3 recommended courses of action that we think are going to get you this result.
I think it's something like that. And I think that there's this local context to it that you don't get when you're just looking at the experts, because you're there in that local situation and you could say, okay, wait a minute, but also this is happening, but also,
and it's minus 34 outside.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's all these different variables that may not be entered into the past thinking of the model or something.
So I kind of think of it like some kind of a consult perhaps with other, like-minded people, but then also keeping you very much part of that process, because ultimately you're going to be the one who makes the final call on it. But something like that. And I think coming also from the starting place of let's help people do their jobs better, as opposed to what could we just offload?
Right. Right. Which is what companies, I wonder if because I think that's where companies are going, right? We're hearing lots of layoffs in companies saying they want to do more AI, but do you think that, I kind of think that's from misinformed CEOs and senior leadership. Thinking of, how can we cut labor totally off, as opposed to looking at ways to maybe strike a balance with labor and using technology, kind of like in the way you're saying, to get to even a more productive, informed, better system.
Yeah,
right?
I think it's definitely CEO goes off to a conference, hears some great things about AI and comes back and thinks this is what we have to do, off 10% of the customer service team or whatever, and figures out, well, maybe that doesn't work, or maybe it works for a while and it results in poor customer service. And then over time, perhaps your customers are going to go away as a result of that. But maybe in the short term, it's a thing that jacks up your stock price and gets you a bonus or whatever the reward structures are. Short-term reward.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely that. I think the longer play is, how could we actually access new markets, do new things, be innovative, grow, these kinds of longer term perspectives. But the quick win, I think, is the thing that sometimes people go for because of the incentives.
Yeah. So it was kind of part of what I think I put in my questions, but like discerning AI hype versus AI reality, like discerning business development, sales, and marketing from what's actually real. Mm-hmm. Like, I think you as an AI literacy person can help. It certainly helped when I took the courses at Amy. Like, it certainly helped me move away from like this doom and gloom, robots are going to take over the world, to a more rationalized thinking, because I understood what's in the box. Mm-hmm. So I think that's, again, like a huge opportunity, is to like empower people to be more AI literate so they can understand what's really going on and discern sales from reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And so a lot of it is, like, as you just said, what is a large language model at the end of the day, right? And, a simple way to think about what it's doing is predicting next words, remixing text or symbols, remixing something that is symbolic and that feels like it understands or it knows things or it has some sense of the world, when really it's just remixing these words in a way that sounds really impressive.
And might be different, seem different, but it's just a different, it's just a different looking cookie.
Yeah.
Because it got put onto the pan with a spoon instead of like an ice cream scooper or something like that. It's the same thing.
Yeah. And then I guess, being realistic about what is the risk profile for turning some of those things over to that autonomous, to the system to do in that autonomous way. And are you okay with that? So, famous case about Air Canada, they had this chatbot. I don't even think it was a fancy generative AI chatbot, just an older model chatbot, told a customer some incorrect information. And then the whole thing went to court, and Air Canada tried to claim that it wasn't them, it was the chatbot that did it.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah.
That was crazy.
Yeah, and they lost their case. So instead of stepping up and doing the right thing, which in a business I think about it from a business standpoint, like, how much did it cost to go to court and do all these things? And at the end of the day, you should have just given the customer the refund.
That was stupid. Like, whoever's thinking that they could make an argument that the chatbot did it, like, that is some really low level not wanting to take responsibility. Yeah. Like, that's really bad.
Yeah. And so, if you back up that story and go to the moment where you have to decide, are we okay to have a chatbot? We know some of the risks and errors. Are we okay with that risk that it might give someone the wrong information? Right. Are we okay taking responsibility and being accountable for that? That's a kind of decision that you should make up front before you adopt it. I think what happens is, hey, cool chatbot, let's get that in here. And we don't have to, we can get rid of a bunch of customer service people because we've got the chatbot. But you haven't really done the full analysis. And so doing that for these tools and realizing that the chatbot or any of these AI tools is going to have a margin of error. Are you okay with that for that task?
Yeah, and that's what goes through my head a lot, especially working with Indigenous communities, First Nations, Métis, Inuit, is you have land guardians, fire guardians out on the land, elders that know the stories and know the land like the back of their hand, right? And their purpose is to, go out and see how things are changing, and are things normal, abnormal, different, whatever. And in the case of like a wildfire, assessing, what's a good place to do a fire break? Where's a bad place to put a fire break? Where should we fire smart or not? And they give that traditional knowledge perspective. Then you've got it combined with a lot of companies that are doing like, oh, well, we can do a satellite image of your reserve, and we can detect, the different forest types, or the tree stands are called, tree stands in an area, and here's where it's thick and here's where it's not, and we think you should go here. And it's kind of like, I think companies have to be careful because you can't disrespect the traditional knowledge in that way. But could these AI tools augment traditional knowledge, or is there a way for First Nations people to incorporate their traditional knowledge into the AI? Maybe. Would they be willing to do that? Probably not a lot of them, because their knowledge has been stolen enough. They're not going to feed it into some random machine like ChatGPT. And so it's an interesting conundrum for me, right? Because I get a lot of vendors that approach me, and they'll say, oh, I know you work in emergency management, you work with First Nations. We have a tool that could like assess their road network and enhance egress during a disaster. So I'll go to their webpage. There's nothing on there about them working with First Nations. All they really want from me is access to my client network, and for me to promote them to my clients, right? Without them having done any effort. And so it kind of leads me to wonder, how First Nations are going to incorporate AI with their traditional knowledge, and if there's a good way to do that.
Yeah. So I'm actually, one of the things I'm working on right now is some work for a university that's putting out a course. And part of that is I'm sitting with this idea of different ways of knowing things. And you've just described a couple. So we have this data-driven way of knowing. That's AI, machine learning, all of that. But we also have other ways of knowing things. Yep. We have tradition, we have culture, we have our sensory experiences, our lived experience. We have all of these other ways of knowing, which I think are complementary to the data-driven way. Yep. And so for me, it's not necessarily about replacing those other ways of knowing, but you could augment and imagine how powerful that would be. You've got that person with decades or many years of experience knowing something because they've experienced it, they've lived it, and they understand the culture of it. And maybe they also get supplemented with a data-driven way of knowing. Now there's a choice to be made about, is this fitting with, maybe it supports what the person is saying. Maybe it brings in some new information that they hadn't considered, or maybe it's something that is flawed in how that information was produced, which happens a lot. We don't question data, but we think about how is data made? What was the instrumentation used? Was it working well? Was that data taken from a different project and now we've applied it to this project because we think it would work for our project, but really it's not appropriate? Yeah. All of these kinds of questions I would ask when it comes to the tool. And so, there's a lot there. And I think we need to expand. One of my concerns with all of this is that we just go down the data-driven way of knowing because we think it's better somehow. Yeah, exactly. And we forget about everything else. Yeah. And that's a real loss. Yeah. Yeah, it's a big loss. And it's one I think about quite a bit because it's you data can't capture everything. You can't develop a worksheet or a data capture system to capture every little element of our world, right? Physical, cultural, spiritual,
all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting question. It would be interesting to do AI literacy in like Blackfoot or Cree or Dene language to understand how the elders would take their interpretation of AI and what it does and then put it into their language. Like, I think that would be quite fascinating to see how they describe AI in like Old Cree or something like that.
Yeah. And you touch on another piece of this whole large language model thing. It is very English dominant, very English dominant. And so this whole idea of, token, because it's not just the words, they break it up into these tokens, and that's really what gets processed. And English, there's a lot of English privilege in all of that and the amount of data that's needed. There are some people doing this in with different communities, in other languages with the consent of the community. And so there's a lot more to be done with that, absolutely. And how well would that architecture even work in some of these languages is a question mark, because we don't really know.
It's an interesting topic that I know, like you did a talk with Little Red River Cree Nation with the recovery team there, and they were like super fascinated with AI and understanding the technology and trying to like figure out how it can do their work. And they were like, I did a demonstration with ChatGPT, like speaking Cree and like seeing if it could translate and stuff. And it kind of worked with some words and it didn't with some, but the staff were like super freaked out that it was even translating some English into Cree, and that it even had some of that training within it. Like, it was kind of a little freaky to them.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of interest in it, but a lot of like wanting to be careful.
I think that's really wise. I think we should be careful. I mean, so one of the things I'm thinking a lot about still is, how are we even here? And it goes back to that whole copyright question that is still unsettled. And I spend a lot of time with arts communities talking about this. And it's interesting because I think there is this sense of wanting to use it, especially for grant applications or those administrative things that we all have to do that we don't love doing. But there's also the sense of, well, how should we even feel about this, knowing where the data came from and knowing that artists weren't compensated and all of these questions. Yeah. And I think we need to really contend with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I hope that artists do kind of, rally together and, the real ones. I know there's digital artists out there that are legitimately calling themselves digital creators and artists, but they're totally stealing. Like, they're not artists. They're just people that see an opportunity to make money and use AI to do art and either develop content, monetize it on TikTok, whatever it is. And I don't think they'll last long. That's just my personal opinion. And for someone too, like, we don't use ChatGPT. We only use Lumo, and it's only for very general types of things. But all of our creation is 100% like human based. Like, I'm kind of sick of AI. It comes up like the stuff that you try and do like an AI logo or an AI video. It's just not good. Like, the time that it takes to like do the prompt and re-prompt it to try and correct it and try and get it to what your vision is. It still never comes out quite right.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day that it's not, like, I don't consider it real. Like, it's not mine.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I know it's not mine.
Yeah, we're having there's definitely a moment happening right now where a lot of people are looking at the so-called AI slop, right?
Yeah.
And kind of pushing back on that. And that aesthetic is just, not something that people want to necessarily engage with. So.
No, I've unfollowed so many people on TikTok because they're just constantly posting AI videos of them because they've trained it to have a character of them, and then doing like things that they could never do in the real world, or making jokes and just doing some comedy satire skits. And, you know, the first few, okay, interesting, funny. This is crazy what Sora 2 can do. But to get that all the time over and over, it's just like, sorry, man, I'm unfollowing you. It's not like you're not, there's no, you're just prompting it to do it. Like, it's too easy.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I don't know. That was like, okay, we were at an hour 13.
Oh, wow.
That's pretty good.
Okay.
Okay, well, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Where can, so you're on LinkedIn a lot?
I am.
That's your main hub?
That's my only social media presence, really.
Okay, so find you on LinkedIn and what's the website?
ethicallyalignedai.com. Okay. I blog on a semi-regular basis there about the kinds of things that we've been talking about.
Right.
So I'm there and on LinkedIn, and that's it.
What's kept you off, like, kind of experimenting with other social?
Well, I was on Twitter until they changed
it's like
structures.
That's a black hole.
You know, truth be told, I've never been a huge fan of social media from the get-go. And so I find it a little bit of a chore myself.
It's a huge chore.
So I don't do a lot of that. I do have a YouTube channel as well, which I sometimes will post to. So that's another outlet.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll search for Katrina on those channels. Find her on LinkedIn. Go to the website. And thank you very much. We'll do this again, I think.
Sounds great.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks for joining us at Hazardscape. You can subscribe to our YouTube and find our ad-free training videos by becoming a supporter on Patreon with a network of other Indigenous peoples looking to make their communities safer. And remember, know your hazardscape and be prepared.